and the last speaker, but please, I would like to recognize His Excellency, the Deputy Governor of Kano State, Alhaji Aminu Abdul Salam, who is personally a friend. Permit me to recognize our royal fathers. Permit me to recognize the Grand Imam of Kano, our father. Permit me also to recognize the former ES, NUC, and former Vice Chancellor of Bayero University, Kano, Professor Abubakar Adamu Rashid, all the speakers, all important people at the high table, professors here present, Assalamu alaikum. It is a great pleasure and profound gratitude to me that I welcome all of you to the second international conference hosted by Center for Islamic Civilization and Interfaith Dialogue by Bayero University, Kano. I'm truly honored to stand before you, before such a distinguished gathering of scholars, researchers, and intellectuals from across the globe. The theme of this conference, Islam and Violence, Facts and Fallacies, is both timely and significant. In a world that often grapples with misperceptions and misunderstandings about Islam, it is imperative that we engage in thoughtful and scholarly discussions to unravel the truth and dispel the myth surrounding the relationship between Islam and violence. Bayero University, Kano has always been committed to fostering an environment of intellectual curiosity and rigorous academic activities or inquiry. This conference serves as a testament of our dedication to promoting understanding and dialogue transcending geographical and cultural boundaries. The aim of this gathering is not only to explore the various dimensions of the theme, but also to provide a platform for scholars to engage or exchange ideas, share research findings, and engage in constructive conversations that will contribute to a more nuanced and informed understanding of the subject matter. Islam, as a religion of peace, justice, and compassion, has often been misinterpreted in the media and distorted by those who seek to perpetuate a narrow and distorted narrative. It is our collective responsibility as scholars to delve into depths of our intellectual capacities and shed light on the reality of Islam, separating facts from fallacies. Throughout the course of this conference, I encourage you all to engage in robust discussions, challenge existing paradigms, and contribute to the body of knowledge that will emerge from our collective efforts. Let us approach this conference with open minds and a commitment to scholarly integrity, respecting diverse perspectives, and fostering an atmosphere of mutual respect. I extend my deepest appreciation to the organizing committee, distinguished keynote speakers, presenters, and other participants for their valuable contributions to making this conference a reality. I am confident that the outcome of our deliberations will not only enrich academic discourse, but will also contribute to a more informed and enlightened global society. Once again, I welcome you all to Bayero University, Kano, and wish you a productive and intellectually stimulating experience at this second International Conference on Islam and Violence, Facts and Fallacies. Assalamu alaikum.
Thank you very much. We welcome our brother Malam Salu Sigirtake, shahararren ɗan siyasa wanda ya yi abubuwa da yawa a jihar Kano. Muna masa marhabin barka da zuwa. Now to the business of the day, the keynote addresses. 3 papers. In Allah, and in 45 minutes we should be done, so that we can listen to Their Highnesses and His Excellency the Governor. Mai girma gwamna, in an tashi a bar mana Malam Osama da Alabuci duk da taron nasu ne, saboda haka za a tafi su za mu rike su ci gaba da wakiltar ka a wannan wuri. Malam Osama kana ji, na nemi umarni kuma za a bar ku kai. Now, Professor Muhammad Salisu Shehu, Vice Chancellor at Istikama University, Sumaila, and former Director of this center, and the brother of us from the Faculty of Education, Bayero University, Kano, and at present, Deputy Secretary General of the Nigerian Supreme Council for Islamic Affairs and Secretary General Islamic Forum of Nigeria. In zan karanta citation ɗinsa to zan cinye lokaci, bari mu sha haka in ya gama kuma insha Allah da kansa sai na fasara da larabci ko da Hausa.
Ana cire shi ne ko mako ne wannan.
Alhamdulillah wali salihin wal aqibatu lil muttaqin wala udwana illa ala zalimin. والصلاة والسلام على من تلقى القرآن من لدن حكيم عليم وعلى آله وصحبه ومن والاهم بإحسان إلى يوم الدين وبعد. His Excellency the Governor of Kano State, ably represented by His Excellency the Deputy Governor, the Chairman of the occasion, our father, teacher and leader, the Grand Imam of Kano, Professor Emeritus, Professor Muhammad Salisu, our royal fathers that are ably represented here, the Vice Chancellor of Bayero University, Kano, and the mentor of mentors, former Executive Secretary of the Nigerian Universities Commission, National Universities Commission, the former Vice Chancellor who founded this center, and I believe today he is filled up with happiness that what he established is giving out its fruits. Professor Abubakar Rashid, the Director of the centers, co-speakers, heads of higher institutions, distinguished scholars and professors, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. The MC has said that I have been given 15 minutes, like my co-speakers. But if you have the program of event, you would see that there would be a keynote speaker My teacher, Dr. Bashir Umar, would have been the first lead paper presenter, and I'm the second lead paper presenter. In that regard, I could have been the third speaker, but I have been hijacked to become the first speaker. And by that token, I deserve some gratification for additional minutes. When we look at this topic, we would see that at the end of it all, the expected outcome of this conference is that the conference should be able at the end to prove that Islam is not a religion of violence, and that violence is falsely, you can say also mischievously associated with Islam. I believe this is the sum total of what this conference intends to achieve. And that will be done easily by stating or citing nusus from the Quran and Sunnah that prove that yes, Islam is a religion of compassion, a religion of mercy, and a religion of peace, not a religion of violence. And historical incidents and facts would also be narrated that demonstrate that Islam is certainly not a religion of violence. If this is done, I am sure the conference would have achieved its purpose. But Mr. Chairman, Mr. Vice Chancellor, this is a university. This is a university, and this is an academic conference. And therefore, necessarily, there is the need to give an academic touch to the discourse. And since Dr. Bashir Ali Umar, who is a scholar I have been listening to since my students' days, is going to speak after me, and since our guest from Mali is also an erudite scholar, a leader of African Muslim scholars for that matter, they are all going to speak after me. They are more conversant and more acquainted with the nusus of the Quran and Sunnah than me, and they are also more attuned to the facts of Islamic history than me. I will leave that business to them. And therefore, what I will do, Mr. Chairman, Mr. Vice Chancellor, is I will try to contextualize the discourse and problematize it. What do I mean by that? Academic discourse needs to be discussed or needs to be situated within a context. And you need, when you want or when you intend to address an issue academically, you have to study the problem. You have to state the problem. You have to define the problem. It is when you define the problem that you will get the thrust of what you intend to discuss. And that is what I am going to do humbly. And for that matter, I will seek the permission of the chairman to read my introduction, where I tried to problematize the discourse and to situate it within a context, and perhaps if time permits, I will present some statistics, and because I have 25 minutes of that, then I will an unpleasant fact stares Muslims in the face. That is the disgustful association of Islam with violence. Rightly or wrongly, therefore, and indeed, by errors of omission and commission, Our utterances and actions, unfortunately, sometimes seem to lead credence to this rather obnoxious notion. And by that token, our tendencies and dispositions have consequently been largely defensive. Hence, the usual assertion has always been, Islam is a religion of peace. This is defensive. Ironically, however, against the backdrop of this apprehension, at the end of it all, this defensive assertion, Islam is a religion of peace. This defensive assertion is what this conference would attempt to prove or rather confirm. An objective study and analysis of this unworthy situation established the role of both internal and external factors that lie at the root of its birth and emergence. There are internal factors and there are external factors that are responsible for associating Islam with violence. In the internal dimension, many Muslim communities have been held hostage by various forms and levels of violence occasioned by mutual hostilities and intensifying armed conflicts and clashes. The consequences of these clashes are of different magnitudes and proportions. Thousands of lives have been lost and property and all other means of livelihood worth billions of dollars have been destroyed and plundered. Take the case of Sudan, the most recent example. The ugly condition of Muslim nations and communities in terms of violence was well and very succinctly captured by the Forum for Promoting Peace and in Muslim Societies in its brochure in 2014, when it identifies and presents about 5 different manifestations and magnitudes of violence in Muslim countries as follows. Number 1, the uncommon nature of the threats is evidenced by unprecedented levels of violence utilizing every type of warfare. This even includes weapons of mass destruction which citizens of the same country are using against one another. Number 2, this violence has a broader reach, as evidenced by the expanding geography that covers a large region of the Muslim and Arab nations. Conflicts are on the verge of spreading to other regions as well. This conflict is different in its duration. Perpetual conflicts with no end in sight are becoming the norm in Muslim countries. Perpetual conflicts with end not in sight are almost becoming the norm in several Muslim countries. Number 4, the ideas and psychology associated with this violence are distinct. This dimension augments the 3 preceding dimensions above, since these conflicts are they have produced the most extreme ideas, the most bizarre fatwas, and the most fanatical and inciting opinions. This discourse has been filled with appalling fatwas, rendering judgments on excommunication, deviance, immorality, and heresy. These fatwas have justified bloodshed while disregarding, irrespective of how morally degraded a society may become. Instead, there are inappropriate claims of engaging in jihad and addressing the ills of society without fulfilling the conditions of doing jihad, which has led to even more suffering in several Muslim countries. Number 5, this conflict has an international implication and tarnishes the image of Islam worldwide. Some might even describe our faith as a religion of terrorism, as they do, and work to try Islam and its adherents under the Chapter 7 of the UN Charter. There are certain practical examples of these manifestations of the internal factors and occasions or incidents of violence in the Muslim world. On one hand, there are bizarre groups that perpetrate all sorts of atrocities, prosecute unconventional warfare in terroristic forms, purportedly in the name of jihad, ranging from either Al-Qaeda or the likes like ISIS, Al-Shabaab, Al-Qaeda in the Maghrib, and near us, the Boko Haram. On the other hand, there are numerous internal mutual armed conflicts in the struggle for power and political dominance as is happening, or as it happened in Iraq, and after Iraq, in Syria, in Libya, and other places. Very recently, Libya, Syria, and Yemen, and to some extent even Egypt, are cases in point when you make reference to the so-called Arab Spring. The external dimension of the factors responsible for the association of violence with Islam and Muslims also have several manifestations. Just as the internal factors have several manifestations, the external factors also have several manifestations. And it is pertinent to make the point that there are symbiotic and interactive and reactionary links between the external and the internal dimensions of the factors responsible for violence in the Muslim world or associated with Muslims. First, there are cases of violence that are clearly associated, cases of violence that are clearly associated with perceived injustice against Muslims, as is the case with the Israeli-Palestine conflict. And look at what is happening now. As I'm speaking now, almost about more than 23,000 people have been killed, wantonly, by Israel in Gaza. More than 10,000 of the people killed are children, and about 7,000 of them are women. And reaction to this kind of injustice is mischievously, condemned as violence. You can see the entire Western media, to accept the fact that Hamas is fighting for freedom. They will only make reference to the 7th October, forgetting the over 75 years of massacre and persecution against Palestinians. And even when they try to interview a person on the media, they will only want to start from 7th October. And they will say that, wouldn't you call what Hamas did on 7th October an act of terrorism? So these kinds of reactions to injustices meted against Muslims are unfortunately associated as violence associated with Islam. Then there are cases of violence that are clearly also, secondly, there are examples of perceived double standards. Double standards in tolerating and or even recognizing governments or regimes that were instituted or enthroned through genuine political mandate as defined, ordained, and provided by due democratic electoral processes and procedures, as was the case of the Islamic Salvation Front in Algeria in 1990 or 1991, and even the case of Hamas that was duly elected in Gaza, but the United Nations would not recognize the political leaders that were duly elected through democratic process in Gaza as legitimate leaders, because the UN will continue to recognize them and to see them as terrorists. But in East Timor, Christians that struggle for self-determination are freedom fighters. In South Sudan, Christians that struggle for self-determination are also freedom fighters, and they will be backed and supported by the United Nations to get their land, to get self-determination. But the Palestinians would always continue to be condemned as terrorists. Very unfortunately. Now, reactions to this, and also remember the kind of ethnic cleansing that took place in the Balkans and the Caucasus against Muslims. When Muslims that stood up to fight for their freedoms in Chechnya, in Abkhazia, for example, all these are terrorists. There are yet two significant manifestations in the external dimensions of the factors responsible for associated violence with Islam and Muslims. These two factors are Islamophobia on one hand and Western media reportage and representation of Islam and the so-called conspiracy theory on the other hand. Islamophobia presents itself in many ways, from ill treatment and molestation of Muslims simply because of their faith or appearances, to derogatory speeches and dissemination of stereotypes and prejudices against Islam and Muslims, and to orchestrated and deliberate mischievous media propaganda against Islam. Islamophobia has had a great impact in denigrating Islam and turning Muslims into monsters and savages in the psyche of the typical Western person and non-Muslim in non-Western countries. Beyond the mere negative reportage of Islam and Muslims, Islamophobia in the Western media had gone to the extent of depicting, let us underline this, beyond the negative reportage of Islam and Muslims, Islamophobia in the Western media had gone to the extent of depicting Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam himself as a violent person and as a terrorist through caricatures and cartoons as a terrorist purportedly in the name of freedom of speech or free speech. Whatever the motives of those cartoons and caricatures may be, with cruel disregard and denial of provocative potency and effect, a condemnation, derogation, and insult would follow when Muslims react. When Muslims react against that, then the condemnation will follow him. See the barbarians, see the violent people, see the criminals, see the savages. When Muslims react to that, at the risk of being mistaken, at the risk of being mistaken, you know what happened in the case of Charlie Hebdo cartoons, isn't it? And Muslim reactions. Now, the West hypocritically and because of Islamophobia would forget what happened. And it is only the reaction of Muslims would now be talked about and will be condemned as violent, this and that. At the risk of being mistaken of denying the existence of violent extremism that commits savagery in the name of Islam, reference must also be made to the conspiracy theory. Recourse to this theory, that is conspiracy theory, ordains a reverse reading. It ordains a reverse reading and critical scrutiny and interpretation of incidents of violence in the Muslim world or purportedly perpetrated by Muslims. On the particular issue of the acts of violent extremism and terrorism committed in the name of Islam and purportedly by Muslims, rather than relying on the stuff usually given out and propagated by mainstream Western media, conspiracy theory suggests that we should search for the possibility of covert operations of violence and aggressions carried out by some hawks and sometimes in connivance with their proteges in the Muslim world, to tarnish the image of Islam and Muslims and to create an excuse that would justify an armada against Islam. While some people do dismiss this cheap and lame, unintelligible defense of Islam and Muslims, the proponents and protagonists of this theory are largely and prominently Western writers and thinkers who have always come out with different, mostly opposite views and interpretation of incidents of violence. There are many names of writers that belong to this school of thought, and the audacity of truth and the ostensible and ubiquitous availability and role of the social media have continued to make conspiracy theory not only thriving, but also gaining a position of institutional credibility. And only recently, we have been told that the September 11 incident was a conspiracy theory, and a lot of other things. Now, we cannot, therefore, when we try to study the association of Islam and violence, we cannot dismiss studying conspiracy theory and the fact that covert operations are being taken in the name of Islamic activism or by Muslims, whatever that may be, in order to justify, military action against Muslims and Islam. It is a pity that although I've been hijacked to be the first speaker, I'm being pressed for time. But let me just quickly, with the permission of, I believe, the chairman and the vice chancellor, who are both my teachers and mentors, let me quickly present. As I was saying, Dr. Bashir and Professor Sila will come and present the Islamic perspective. But quickly, let me present some statistics. When we talk about Islam and violence, we need to read history in its entirety and see across all the civilizations, which of the civilizations is most associated with violence. A book that has been recently published by the IIIT, War and Peace in Islam, the misuse and abuse of jihad, identified a number of statistics which are very important. Now, when we read all these statistics, we can see today, Christianity has the Western media. It monopolizes the media. But then, ironically, throughout his human history, Christianity as a religion and Christianity as a civilization and the West, that is the domain of Christendom, has the monopoly of violence throughout human history. Quickly, Christian societies have been identified as the most bellicose because in almost all history, Christianity is responsible for 119 to 236 million killings of human beings in the world. Political violence perpetrated by Christian people has been the highest. When you take all the textbooks, genocides, especially if you take Christianity in comparison with Islam, genocides, Christian one was responsible for committing about 14 out of 23 instances of genocide in recent history. And that is about 51.85% of genocides in recent history committed by Christian world. While the Islamic civilization, even if cases of genocide were